was sharing a story with you that we started our time together this morning. First of all, I just want to say I'm so thankful for the mothers that you're here. It's so good to see each one of you. I just want to wish you a very special Mother's Day. There was a lady, and she was married, and she had a granddaughter with her, and she had just bought a brand new car, and she was so excited. So she gets out in her car. It's her first day, first time she's driving it, and she has a fender bender. And the first time. So she gets home, and her husband's not with her, and she tells her granddaughter, she says, whatever you do, she says, don't tell Grandpa what happened. So she doesn't say anything. The little granddaughter looks and says, okay. And a few minutes later, she notices her husband walks into the house and is completely quiet and never says one word and just walks straight down the steps to his man cave. So she runs over to her granddaughter and she goes, honey, did you tell Grandpa what happened? And she looked at her grandma and she says, no. She says, I didn't tell him. She goes, what did you tell him? She said, I only told him, she said, 4 times, whatever you do, don't look in the garage. Now, sometimes we live in an age where we get stressed, don't we? You go back, many of you probably watched it at one time or another. But remember the musical that was done, Fiddler on the Roof? It was very famous, came out and hit the Broadway stage in 1964. It was the first musical production to ever have over 3,000 shows on Broadway back in 1964. But if you remember the theme of the musical, Fiddler on the Roof, you remember that the Jewish village people were being persecuted by the Russians, and they were forced to leave and to run for their lives. Well, somebody went up to the rabbi, and they said, before he left, they said, Rabbi, wouldn't this be a good time for the Messiah to come back? And the rabbi looked at him and said, yes, my son, but in the meantime, get packing. Now, sometimes we look and we get stressed out. We just did the Lord's Prayer a moment ago. And we said what? Thy will be done. That's what we talked about, the Lord. Your will be done. All right, what that means is it refers to patience of trusting in God's will, His timing, His love, and His power, that we're able to trust in that. So I thought, what subject we're going to talk about today being Mother's Day, not only for mothers, because I think of all the things that they've gone through for the years. My mother's in heaven, but I think of all the things I did to her before she got there, all the things she had to put up with all these years. And we think, okay, what subject, when you think of mothers and you think something would apply to all of us, is what? Is patience, isn't it? It's hard to be patient. You think of how patient mothers are. How do they do it all the time? Raising those children. Many of them, through the years, now many couples both have to work in order to make it, but many years, a lot of the mothers did not work and had the kids home all day. Now, this past weekend, Friday and Saturday, I had the privilege of staying with my son and my grandson. His wife was going to Florida with her parent, with her dad, because you remember Mom passed away and they were going to spread her ashes down there in Florida. So she went with them for a couple of days. And so Josh called me up and goes, how would you like to come up and stay with me? And, Hayden, I thought, oh, I can't wait, I thought this house is going to be destructed by the time she gets back. She'll never let it happen again. So I shot up there Friday night. We had fun. We had a great time. He is full of energy. I wish I had all the energy he has. Kids, aren't they unbelievable? Just boundless energy. They can just play. You run and you do this, and then they run back, and then they do this, and they run back again. You're going, man, don't you ever get tired? Don't you just want to sit down? Well, one of the things I noticed, he's really, really good with them. And one of the things that Josh does that's so good, and many of you have experienced that, is he's patient. He's very patient with him. And I learned a lesson. Sometimes it's good to go back and just take a step back and look and watch children, and we can learn so much from them. We went out to get something to eat yesterday, and we had it sitting there at the table, and we thought, okay, are we going to do this? Is this going to be an adventure? You never know when they're that age. is it going to be like when you take them out to eat and they get out in public? You know, they're just a year old, so you're thinking, oh no. But we got out there, and the key was, and I learned, all the things, and parents or grandparents, you know this is a secret, is you keep them busy. So the whole time we were there, he was just feeding them food. Giving them pieces of bread and giving it to him and eating, and I thought, well, he's going to fit in this family well. But just keep putting, give him a piece of bread, give him a piece of banana, give him a piece of this, and then you play with them all day, and you keep them moving. And I noticed children, as long as they're moving, or you're pushing them and taking them on a walk, as long as you're doing something and there's action, most of the time they're okay. But the moment that you stop, the moment that you don't feed them, the moment that you don't take care of them, all of a sudden, it's like, what are you doing? You're not paying attention to me now. And I often thought in life, we're the same way. We're okay as long as we're doing something, we're thinking about something, we're engaged in an activity. But the moment all of a sudden that there's nothing there, all of a sudden we kind of throw up our hands and go, what's this about? And it's so easy to get frustrated. Would you agree that patience is hard? Do you think patience is difficult? I thought I was always patient until I get older. I'm thinking I'm getting more and more impatient, Didn't they see that light? It changed. Didn't that lady see that there's only 12 items at this checkout? What's she doing with that menu? How long is it going to take them to get my order? You go through the fast food. This just drives me insane. I think I've told you this before. You get up there, and the person in front of you has not yet decided what they're going to order. So you're sitting there, I'm sort of timing it going, how long does it take you to figure out what you want to order? You should already have that ready. This is fast food. Not let's decide, what do you think we're going to get today? Well, I don't know. We haven't talked about that yet. Patience is tough sometimes. Now, we want to look at our passage of Scripture this morning found in James chapter 5, verses 7 to 11. And James is talking here about patience. Let me read to you a few verses about patience. Starting in verse 7 of James chapter 5. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. They didn't know when it was going to take place. He says, behold, the husbandman, he's talking about, he says husbandman, here he's talking about a farmer. The husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth. And think how he describes the fruit. He describes it as being precious. Why? Because that was his livelihood. That's what he lived by, what he grew. And have long patience for it, until he received the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Take, my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. In other words, all the things they went through and tried to teach you. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, and the Lord is very pitiful and under tender mercy. Now, he's saying, you've seen examples of how God was merciful to others. You've heard others talk about how important it is to be merciful and be patient. But this morning, we're going to talk about that. Who can find a patient soul? How many people do you know who are really patient? Are you really patient? Are you somebody who's a patient person, or are you somebody that you find yourself, it gets harder and it gets harder and it gets harder? Let's take a look at that this morning. Number one is patience is a virtue that carries a lot of weight. W-A-I-T. It carries a lot of weight. We have to understand that what? That we are not on the planning committee, we're on the welcoming committee. In other words, we welcome God. We're not on the planning committee. In other words, God doesn't normally call us, maybe some of us, He doesn't normally call us to come down and say, this morning, Nicholas would say, God called me at 8:30 this morning, and He told me to be ready by 8:45. Most of the time, we don't get that type of message, do we? We're not on the planning committee. We don't tell God what to do. We don't tell God how to schedule things. He schedules how His will schedules and tells us what's going on. We're on the welcoming committee. In other words, We need to be the ones that welcome God into our life and are one day waiting for him to come and say, Lord, until that time comes, I'm going to follow what it is that you want me to do. So we're on the welcoming committee. We are to what? Patiently be waiting. That's hard to do in life, isn't it? Lord, I want these things to happen now. I want them to happen fast. We live in the age of what? Of microwave. And can you understand? Can you go back and say, what did we do before we microwave? Before we get something real quick. Just heat that up. It's 30 seconds. It's ready to go. I got to heat my coffee up in 20 seconds. It's going to be hot again. What did we do? God, we're in the process of microwave. But God is in the process of what? Of marinating. Of preparing. Of taking time. Of planning the next stage for our life, what it is he may want us to do. And it's hard for us to understand that because we have a difficult time waiting. But patience doesn't mean inaction. It doesn't mean because I need to be patient that I can be active and I don't have to do anything. A farmer, you understand, has to be patient when they plant their crop, right? But once they plant their crop, and I'm not a farmer, but once they plant their crop, is that the end of it? Do they just say, plant it and say, well, you know what, in the fall or the spring, when things harvest, I'll go back and get it. Until then, I don't have to do anything. No, they plant their crop, and they have to take care of that, and they have to work in that the whole time. It's never over. There's always action, things to be doing. Even though we might be patient, we have to learn. Why is that? The Bible tells us that the farmer, his crop is valuable. What's he saying to you and I? He's saying that our work, we may not be a farmer, but our work is the people that we come in contact with in our lives. That's who we come in contact with. And he says you need to be patient with them because that is the work in your life that is truly valuable. What is valuable in my life? It's the time that I spend with my family. It's the time that I spend with my friends. It's the time I spend with the people that I care about, I love about. What is truly valuable in your life as far as your time? What is it that is your crop? Many of you here today are mothers, grandmothers. You've raised kids, you've had interaction with grandparents. We have fathers, we have uncles, we have aunts. We have all of them represented right in this group this morning. And you go back and you say, what is so important? It's my crop, it's the people that I spend time with. The people that I'm around. That those are the ones I have to learn that I have to learn patience and love them and spend time with them and care about them. Why? Because God says, when you do your part, I'll do my part. You see, if the farmer takes a good job of his crops and waters them, takes care of them, what's going to happen? That's his job to plant and watch over them. He says, God will then say, I'll do my part, and you'll have the harvest at a later time. He says to us, your job is to spend patience with those that are valuable, to invest your life, people that you love, that you care, that you can make contact with, make influence with, and you do your part, and you work on that, and I'll do my part, and I'll work in their life, and I'll take care of them. You see the difference? I do my part, God does his part, and that's what James is talking about here. We do our part, and he does his part. Because there will be those who wait. Farmers, they work, they wait. We minister, and we wait to see what God does. And you know what? It takes faith, because besides the effort that we may put in, and you may put a lot of effort into other people's lives. You may do everything you can, but it's still God that has to speak to the heart and work in there. Despite all the effort we may do, it's God that has to work and be able to do a special effort. We look back and we think of all the stories. There was a small church in Mississippi. And in this church, there was a mother, her husband, and they had a young family. And they were sitting in the service thinking of, maybe Cora, Alex's age. They were sitting here this morning. It could be Emma. And they were sitting there with their mom and dad. And they got up and they were listening. The pastor got up. And the pastor, the little boy that was sitting next to his mom, and she told the people before the service, he said, I'm so proud of them. They always behave so good in church. They're so fantastic. But the pastor was their grandpa, all right? And he got up there and he was speaking. You know how it is sometimes. Pastor get excited. And he got to a point, that he was trying to really get used with enthusiasm and trying to highlight. And he got up there and he put some power in that point, and he raised his voice up as he gave that point. And all of a sudden, the little boy stood up and said, "Papa, calm down." And you see, sometimes in life, we just have to take a step back and say, "John, calm down. Look at all that's going on in your life. Calm down." And I thought, when was the last time that I spent 2 days with a little boy? I learned again what it means to be patient. I watched my son. And I thought, sometimes, John, you are so impatient. So impatient. You think you are patient, but you're not. And sometimes in life we can think, I'm so patient, and we're not. People come into our lives, we look at them and we think, why are you here? I'm busy right now. Of all times, I'm busy, and you walked in. You got to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to do this, And it's easy to get impatient. Fight it all the time. You fight it all the time with our schedules. Another little girl, she went with her friend to the school office, and her little friend lost her tooth. And so they went into the school nurse, and the school nurse looked, and she saw the tooth, and the nurse looked at the little girl and goes, now she goes, because she was talking about the tooth fairy, she goes, I want to take my tooth home because I want to give it to the tooth fairy. And the nurse looked at the little girl and goes, now the tooth fairy is your mother. And so she goes home, and she goes to her mom, and she says, Mom, she goes, are you really the tooth fairy? And her mother goes, yes, I am the tooth fairy. And she goes, and she kind of had that look, she goes, oh, now it's over. I've blown it, the surprise is gone, now she knows it's me. And she kind of looked, and she startled, she goes, well, how do you get all the kids' houses? See, they still have that belief, They believe that you're invincible. They believe that's who you are. And sometimes we disappoint them. We're not patient. God looks at it and says, I want you to learn, just as mothers learn patience with their kids, that fathers, whoever we are, grandfathers, grandmas, aunts, uncles, just people, friends, everybody we come in contact with, look at my whole life and say, have I learned ever to be patient? Sometimes I need a constant reminder to be patient in my life. Let God do His work. That I try to rush Him so much and try to push Him. And He says, John, you need to take a step back. I'm not done teaching you this lesson yet. You may have already thought that you knew it, but I've got some things I need to show you. And I got some things I need to teach you. You haven't learned those yet the way I want you to. It's very humbling. You go back and think, I need to learn patience. And James tells us we need to learn patience. We need to look at a farmer and understand some of the lessons. Why? Because some things are worth waiting for. God says one day, when you get to heaven, I promise you that you'll receive your faithful what? Rewards. Now, is there anybody here from the time you can remember that you were in school, and the time now in life, who doesn't like rewards? Don't you love those rewards? You do something well, It's like with Hayden, he does something well, and good boy. And now he starts, they're at that age where they start imitating you. So he looks back at you and starts, clapping. And I thought, what do we really need in life? We need encouragement. We need people who are patient with us. People are saying, it's okay. I'm right there for you. I'm going to be patient with you. I'm going to come along with you. I'm going to make sure that on this walk, I'm going to go with you. You're not going to be by yourself. Why is that? Because God is not done with you and I. He's not done with us. He has a plan for us. There was a boy who was staying with his grandma. And he was sitting there with his grandma, and he looked at his grandma, and she picked up a pencil. And she was writing a letter. And he's sitting there, he says, Grandma, he said, who are you writing the letter to? And she says, I'm writing it to you. And she goes, but more important than the words that I'm writing you is the pencil that I'm using. And he looked at the pencil and he says, Grandma, he says, what's so special about the pencil? And she goes, well, if you just would know all the capabilities of the pencil, you would understand. She goes, I hope one day you're like this pencil. And he said, what do you mean like that pencil? What's so special about it? She said, well, she goes, I believe that one day, it's just this pencil, you can pick it up and be used, and you can do some great things. But always remember that what? That God can guide you in order to get those things and be able to achieve those things. Remember that God can use you. And then she said, and look at this pencil. She goes, it has an eraser on it. And she said, there'll be times when you'll make a mistake. And you'll have to admit that mistake and have to recover from that and have to continue on. And she goes, and sometimes she goes, when I use this pencil, if I use it long enough, she goes, the lead in it, she goes, the point in it will start to get a little bit dull. And she said, you'll need to get this pencil sharpened. And she said, sometimes getting sharpened might be a little bit painful, but sometimes we need to go back and get refined a little bit and get sharpened a little bit. And then she looked at it and she said, showed him the pencil. She said, you see the wooden exterior of this pencil? And he said, yeah. She said, it's not the wooden exterior of the pencil that's so important, it's what's inside of it. She said, there'll always be people who'll be looking on the outside. She said, but remember, the most important thing is what's on the inside, and stay in touch with that. And then she took the pencil one last time. She put it on the paper, and she made a mark. And she said, did you see what I did with the pencil? And he looked at her and said, yeah, Grandma, you made a mark with the pencil. And she said, well, with your life, you want to make sure that when you invest your life, whatever you plan to do, that remember, you'll make a mark with your life one way or the other. What mark will that be? And I often thought as God looks down at us and he says, you know, each of us are like that pencil. And what mark will we leave? How will he use us? What will we do with that? God is not done with us today. His way is always the complete way. Sometimes it may seem slow. At times I thought it was slow. But yet he's never late with what he does for us. He says, I want you to be patient. And you know what patience is? Patience is living with the unexplained. You like to have everything explained to you? Everybody around says, boy, you have a lot of questions. I'm always asking questions. What about this? Well, what about this? And why does this happen? And why does it do that? And why does it do that? Maybe you're like that. Patience is learning to live with the unexplained. For we will learn all through life that not everything is going to be explained to us. We're going to get frustrated if we do. And God says, I want you to learn patience even when you don't understand it. He says, while you're waiting, I want you to stand strong. When you go back and you look in the Greek of the New Testament, which is Greek language, when you look at those words, what it means to be patient, it talks about two things you can define them, and they're military terms where they came from. Number one is to endure, to last through it. The second one is to stand firm, not to get yourself moved off back and forth, but to stand firm while you're waiting, to be strong while you're waiting. That's not easy to do sometimes because we want the answer. And have you noticed that impatient people tend to be angry people? When you get impatient, are you happy? Are you happy when you get impatient? Most of the time when we get impatient, what it means that we're not happy, that we're not content, or we wouldn't become impatient. We get upset, we get frustrated. We learn that what? Patience helps us to be what? Better communicators. There's some people in their life, they struggle all their life in being able to communicate one with another. It's argument after argument, it's fight after fight. They never learn to be communicators. You know why? Because they're never happy, they're never content, they're never patient, they're always upset, they're always thinking about the next thing, and they never take time to stop back and say, let me take a look at this. What's really happening here? Let me take a look so I can learn how to be a better communicator. Enduring, if you notice, is what? It's never instantaneous. I don't endure 1 second and I'm done. Enduring, being patient, is not instantaneous. It takes time. It takes courage. It takes work. It takes practice. If you've noticed, you get into a situation the first time, you may not be so patient. You might get mad. You might get angry with other people, with life in general. You get impatient. You get mad. And as time goes on, we allow it to teach us. We've learned how to become more patient. We begin to understand life in a better way. We grow in maturity, and it helps us in dealing and getting along with other people. And at the end result, at the end of the day, one day, patience will actually bring happiness. He said, one day I will be content. When I stand before God, I get my rewards there. I will be patient, and it will bring happiness. There were times I never thought it would. God promises, if you're patient, it'll be worth it. Just like the farmer who waits and waits, who takes care of his crop, and finally comes in. And he says, the patience was worth it. I close with this illustration this morning, and this Mother's Day will be finished. Years ago, maybe you've heard the story told, there was a man who drove a taxi. And he got his final call of the day. He's driving down the road, went to this small home, he pulled up, and even though it was his last call, he wanted to be on time, he wanted to get done so he could go home. So he pulled into the driveway, and he sat there for a minute and thought, well, if they don't come pretty quick, I'm just going to zip out, I'm going to take off. And he was getting impatient. Nobody came. So something finally prompted him. He got out of his car just before he was going to take off. He walked up, about ready to knock on the door, and inside the door was an older lady. He looked at her, she was 90 years old. True story, 90 years old. And when he looked in the door, he's looked in the house and in the background, and he saw there were all kind of boxes packed up, all kind of things that were inside that door. And she opened the door and she had a bag and she came out, was walking slowly. He took her by the arm and helped her, and she thanked him and put him in the car. They started driving. She goes, what's the address I need to take you to? She gave him the address of where they were going to go. And they started driving. And she said, as we drive to my destination, she said, would you mind if we drive through downtown? And he looked at her kind of shocked, and he said, well, that's going to take longer. And she said, that's okay, I've got time. So he said, okay. She looked at him, she said, I'm in no hurry. She goes, I'm just going to hospice. She asked him as they went through the town, she goes, can you stop here? She said, that's where my husband and I used to live. And he pulled off, allowed her to get out of the car. She walked over and she looked at the house that her and her husband had. Got back in the car and they started driving again. She said, can you stop over here? She said, that's where I used to dance. And stopped there and looked. She asked him a couple more sites if he could stop. Finally, the sun was starting to go down and she was getting tired. And she said to him, I'm tired. She goes, can you just take me home? So he took her, and he stopped in front of that little home. And what he did, they were expecting her, a small rest home. The two gentlemen came out with a wheelchair to pick her up out of the car. She got out of the car, he got out of the car. She turned to him, she said, how much do I owe you? And he said, nothing. And she said, well, she goes, you've got to make a living. He said, there'll be other passengers. And so he went over and he put his arm around her and gave her a hug. And she said, you know what? You gave an old lady a moment of joy.
He was driving away. And he thought to himself, he said, you know what? What if I would have been impatient? And I wouldn't have stayed. And I wouldn't have picked her up. He said, I would have missed a tremendous blessing of what God wanted me to have. Why do I talk about patience? We learn from little kids. We learn from people. We learn from situations. James goes back and says, you have to learn to be patient. You have to understand that when you plant the crop and you take care of it and you do your part, that God will take care of his part, and one day it will be worth it. Sometimes you may look at your life and say, oh, Pastor John, sometimes I just don't know. I don't know if this battle, I don't know if this race is worth it. I don't know if all the time invested, all the effort is worth it. Sometimes we ask ourselves that question. God comes along and says, it'll be worth it one day. Every day he gives us opportunities to be patient. We learn from James that God does not preserve us from waiting or from challenges. They still come, but he does promise that one day it will be worth it. And we end with these words, until that day. Until that day, I'll be patient. I'm going to ask you at this time, if you're able to stand and be ready to close this time this morning. And our song is Let There Be Peace on Earth as we close our time together today. Opportunity as we leave. Let me take each moment and to live it. You're going to have the opportunity. I'm going to have the opportunity. And I, again, encourage you. Your mom's still alive. Give her a hug today and let her know you love her. If not, thank the Lord and say, Lord, thank you for the things I learned that she taught me, that I gained. Thank you, God, for that. And I know I'll see her one day again. And this Mother's Day, I'm so glad that you came and were part of our service today. It's a special day. It's a great day. And we actually have nice weather. It's a bonus in Ohio. And I hope you'll come back next Sunday. Next Sunday, we're going to talk about, do you ever get stressed in life? No, I know most of you don't. I know Bill doesn't. He's already left. he's a John Baker looks around and says, yeah, he did leave. Where'd he go? Bill doesn't need the message next week because he never gets stressed. But he's right there by the door. There he is. But most of us do get stressed. And we're going to talk about next Sunday about
making the best of it. How do I make the best of it? What do? How can I make the best of difficult and challenging situations in life? That's what we're going to talk about. Bill, I'm glad to see you're still here. I got two Bills. All right, before I make any more mistakes, let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for today. Lord, we thank you for moms, for the impact they've had in our lives. Lord, we pray that we let them know we love them, thank them. Lord, we pray that as we leave here today, that we would understand that each moment that you give to us is a gift. Lord, I pray we would learn how to use it, how to live it. In Jesus' name.